The desperate call. The mining station Starweaver hung in the void like a metallic spider, its extraction arms stretched toward the asteroid field. Inside its command center, Station Manager Thylex watched the proximity sensors with growing dread. 3 unidentified vessels had dropped out of hyperspace 20 minutes ago, and they weren't responding to any communication attempts. Thylex's tentacles trembled as she turned to her security chief, a reptilian Korvac named Senth. The crystalline patches on her blue skin flickered with anxiety, a trait common to her species, the Volari. They were merchants and miners, not warriors. The Galactic Commerce Guild had promised this sector was safe, far from any conflict zones or pirate territories. The station's alarm suddenly screamed through every corridor. Red lights bathed the command center in an ominous glow. On the main display, the 3 ships had begun moving toward them in a predatory formation. Senth's scales shifted from green to pale yellow, indicating his fear. These vessels bore no identification markers, no guild registration, nothing that suggested legitimate business. Communications Officer Pren, a small furry Mokari, frantically worked his console. His 6 fingers danced across the holographic interface as he tried every frequency, every language in the station's database. The silence from the approaching ships was more terrifying than any threat could have been. They were now close enough for visual scanning, and what appeared on the screen made everyone in the command center step back. The ships were sleek and black, designed for one purpose: violence. Weapon ports lined their hulls like teeth in a predator's mouth. These weren't pirates looking for cargo. These were something worse: raiders who left no witnesses, who stripped stations not just of resources but of life itself. The infamous Shadowclaw Syndicate had finally reached their quiet corner of space. Thylex made a decision that would change everything. She activated the Universal Distress Beacon, sending out an SOS on all frequencies, including the ancient emergency channels that most modern ships ignored. The signal would reach across light years, begging for help from anyone who might hear it. The 1,000 souls aboard Starweaver needed a miracle. As the beacon transmitted, Pren noticed something strange on his console. The signal was being amplified, boosted by some unknown relay station. It was reaching farther than it should, penetrating into regions of space that the Volari had never explored. Regions that older spacers warned about in whispered tales. The territories where the Deathworlders dwelt. The first missile from the Shadowclaw ships impacted Starweaver's shields, sending vibrations through the entire structure. Children in the residential sections cried as their parents held them close. Workers abandoned their posts, running for escape pods that everyone knew wouldn't outrun the raiders. The shield generator's whine grew higher as it struggled against the assault. In the depths of space, 300 light-years away, a different kind of vessel detected the distress signal. The TSS Retribution, flagship of Terran Battle Group 9, was conducting routine patrols along the outer frontier. Captain Sarah Chen stood on her bridge, reviewing supply reports when her communications officer suddenly straightened in his chair. Lieutenant Martinez turned to his captain with an expression she recognized immediately. Someone needed help. The translated distress call played through the bridge speakers, and Chen heard the fear in the alien voice. A mining station, civilians, families under attack. The coordinates placed them in neutral space, technically outside Terran jurisdiction. But jurisdiction had never stopped humans from answering a cry for help. Chen opened a channel to the other ships in her battle group. The destroyers Havoc and Wildfire responded immediately. Their captains knew what she would say before she spoke. It would take them 4 hours at maximum burn to reach the station. 4 hours that those civilians might not have. But humans had never been ones to calculate odds when lives were at stake. Back on Starweaver, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The Shadowclaw ships had disabled their primary shield generator. Boarding pods launched from the raider vessels, heading for the station's docking ports. Senth gathered what few security personnel they had, knowing their light stunners would be useless against military-grade armor. They would make their stand anyway because that's what duty demanded. Thylex stood at her post, tentacles wrapped around the command console for support. She thought of her mate and their 3 younglings hiding in their quarters. She thought of the 500 miners who had trusted the Guild's promises of safety. She thought of how the galaxy would never know what happened here. Another station simply vanishing into the void. Then Pren's voice cut through her despair. He was staring at his console in disbelief. running the same scan 3 times to be sure. Multiple hyperspace signatures had appeared at the edge of their sensor range. Large signatures. Military-grade signatures. But the configuration was all wrong for any ship design in the Galactic Registry. The first boarding pod attached to Starweaver's hull with a metallic shriek. Cutting torches began working on the airlock doors. Santh and his security team took position in the corridor beyond, their weapons raised despite their futility. The miners and their families huddled in safe rooms that weren't really safe at all. Everyone waited for the end to come. But the Shadowclaw raiders had made a critical error. They had been so focused on their prey that they hadn't noticed the new arrivals until it was too late. 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, moving with a coordination that spoke of long practice and deadly intent. The TSS Retribution led the charge, her hull bristling with weapons that humans had perfected through centuries of conflict. Captain Chen's voice echoed across the bridge as she assessed the situation. 3 hostile vessels attacking a civilian station. No response to hails. Clear and present danger to innocent lives. The rules of engagement were satisfied. She gave the order that her crew had been training for their entire careers. Weapons free. Protect the station. The first indication the Shadowclaw raiders had of trouble was when their rear ship simply ceased to exist. The Havoc's main railgun had fired a tungsten rod at a significant percentage of light speed. The kinetic impact turned the raider vessel into an expanding cloud of superheated gas and debris. No shields could stop pure physics delivered with human precision. On Starweaver's bridge, the crew watched in stunned silence as the tactical display updated. 1 raider ship was gone. The other 2 were trying to break away from the station, but it was already too late. The wildfire had positioned itself to cut off their escape route. The Retribution was closing from another angle. It was a textbook pincer maneuver, executed with terrifying efficiency. The lead Shadowclaw ship tried to use Starweaver as a shield, positioning itself so that the humans would risk hitting the station if they fired. It was a tactic that might have worked against the cautious members of the Galactic Council. But humans had learned to thread needles with weapons that could crack moons. The Retribution's targeting computer calculated angles and velocities that organic minds couldn't comprehend. Precision laser strikes disabled the raiders' engines without touching a single meter of the station's hull. Missile pods opened on the wildfire, launching a swarm of interceptors that surrounded the crippled vessel. The second raider tried to jump to hyperspace, but the Havoc had already deployed interdiction fields. There would be no escape for those who preyed on the innocent. The boarding pod attached to Starweaver suddenly detached, its operators apparently receiving urgent recall orders. But it was too late for them as well. The Retribution's point defense systems tracked the small craft with mechanical precision. A single burst of coherent light turned it into glowing fragments that sparkled briefly, before fading into the darkness. Captain Chen opened a channel to the station, broadcasting on the same frequency as their distress signal. Her voice was calm and professional, carrying the authority of someone who had done this before. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Space Force. The threat to your station has been neutralized. We are here to help. Please respond." In Starweaver's command center, no one moved for a long moment. They had called for help, and help had come. But it had come from the one source they feared might be worse than the raiders themselves. The Deathworlders. The humans. The species from the Hell world that had somehow achieved spaceflight, despite coming from a planet that actively tried to kill them. When predators become protectors. Thylex's translator struggled with the humans' words for a moment before rendering them in clear Valari. The voice didn't sound like a monster's voice. It sounded tired, concerned, and surprisingly gentle. She looked at her crew, seeing her own confusion reflected in their expressions. The humans had just destroyed 2 raider ships and crippled a third with an efficiency that was frankly terrifying. Yet now they offered help. Santh was the first to speak, his scales shifting through a pattern of colors that indicated deep thought. "Manager, we have little choice. Our shields are down, life support is damaged, and we have wounded from the attack. If the humans meant us harm, we would already be dead." The brutal logic of his words couldn't be denied. With trembling tentacles, Thylex activated the communication system. "Captain Chen, this is Station Manager Thylex of the mining station Starweaver. We accept your assistance. Thank you for saving us." Her voice cracked on the last words. Emotion overwhelming protocol. 20 minutes later, the first human shuttle docked with Starweaver. The station's inhabitants had gathered in the main corridor, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Parents held their younglings close, workers whispered among themselves, and security stood ready, though they knew their weapons would be useless against the Deathworlders. The airlock cycled and the humans entered. They were not what anyone expected. Yes, they were bipedal predators with forward-facing eyes, but they moved carefully, obviously trying not to frighten anyone. The leader, a woman with dark skin and kind eyes, held her hands visible and empty. She wore a medical insignia on her uniform. Dr. James Washington introduced himself with a smile that he kept carefully closed-lipped, having been briefed that many species found human teeth disturbing. Behind him came a team of engineers and medical personnel, all moving with the same deliberate care. They carried equipment and supplies, not weapons. One young human woman knelt down to be at eye level with a terrified Mokari child, offering a sealed packet of what looked like colorful candy. The humans spread through the station with remarkable efficiency, but it wasn't the efficiency of conquerors. It was the practiced motion of those who had done disaster relief before. Engineers immediately went to work on the shield generators and life support systems. Medics set up treatment stations for the wounded. Someone even began preparing food in the damaged cafeteria, somehow making the emergency rations smell appetizing. Thylex found herself working alongside Captain Chen in the command center. The human woman was shorter than expected, barely reaching Thylex's middle segment. But she radiated a confidence that was oddly reassuring. Together, they reviewed the station's damage reports and began prioritizing repairs. Chen's fingers moved across the holographic displays with surprising delicacy. Your primary processor took a hit from an EMP burst. We can replace it with one of our spare units. It won't be perfect, but it'll get you running until you can get proper repairs. She paused, then added, I'm sorry we couldn't get here sooner. The genuine regret in the human's voice made Thylex's crystalline patches pulse with confusion. You traveled 300 light-years in 4 hours to save complete strangers. Why would you apologize? Chen looked up at her, and for a moment Thylex saw something in those predator eyes that she recognized. Protectiveness. The same look Thylex had when she thought of her younglings. Because people were afraid, Chen said simply. Your distress call. We could hear the fear in it. No one should have to feel that alone. She turned back to the displays as if embarrassed by the admission. We know what it's like to be afraid. Our world taught us that, but it also taught us that sometimes the scariest looking thing is what stands between you and the real monsters. Word spread quickly through the station. The humans were not what the stories claimed. Yes, they were strong. A human engineer lifted a beam that would have required 4 Valari to move. Yes, they were predators. Their eyes tracked movement with unnerving accuracy. But they were also something else. They were kind. In the medical bay, Dr. Washington treated a wounded miner with hands that could have crushed bone but instead moved with surgical precision. He hummed something he called a lullaby to keep the patient calm. The melody was strange but soothing. When he finished, he stayed to make sure the miner was comfortable, adjusting blankets and checking readings with paternal concern. The young human woman, Corporal Lisa Park, had somehow gathered all the station's children around her. She was teaching them a human game called hide and seek, which the younglings found delightful despite its predatory origins. Their laughter echoed through corridors that had held only fear an hour ago. Parents watched in amazement as their children played freely with a Deathworlder. Engineer Chief Patel worked alongside Senth's security team to reinforce the station's defenses. He explained human shield technology with enthusiasm, showing them innovations that the Galactic Council had never considered. Why layer shields when you can oscillate them? It's like armor that's always moving, never giving an impact the same surface twice. His excitement was infectious, and soon the Korvax security officers were offering their own suggestions. As the hours passed, something remarkable happened. The fear began to fade, replaced by something else. Gratitude, certainly, but also curiosity. A Valari engineer asked about human ship designs. A Mokari cook compared recipes with the human quartermaster. Children drew pictures of their new friends and shyly presented them as gifts, which the humans accepted with what appeared to be genuine delight. Captain Chen received a priority message from the Retribution. The surviving Shadowclaw raiders had been secured and were ready for transfer to Galactic Authority custody. But there was a complication. The raiders' navigation computers showed this wasn't a random attack. Starweaver had been specifically targeted. Someone had sold them information about the station's defenses and schedule. Thylex's patches flared with anger when Chen shared this information. Someone in the Commerce Guild had betrayed them, traded their lives for profit. The human captain placed a surprisingly gentle hand on what she probably thought was Thylex's shoulder. We'll help you find out who. The Terran Space Force takes betrayal of innocence very seriously. Very seriously indeed. The implicit threat in those words should have been terrifying, but Thylex found it comforting instead. The humans' capacity for violence had saved them. Now that same capacity would seek justice for them. It was a strange feeling, to have predators as protectors, but not an unpleasant one. As the station's systems came back online one by one, Pren made a discovery that would change everything. The mysterious relay that had boosted their distress signal, it was human in origin. The Terran Space Force had seeded the outer regions with hidden relays, specifically to detect distress calls from anyone who might need help. They had been watching, waiting, ready to respond to any cry for aid. The Deathworlders, the monsters from the Hell Planet, had built a network designed for nothing but helping strangers in need. The irony was not lost on anyone in the command center. Captain Chen confirmed Pren's discovery with a nod. We've had them out here for years. Space is dangerous enough without adding to each other's problems. She pulled up a star chart showing dozens of relay positions. We might be Deathworlders, but that just means we know how precious life is. The human medical team had finished treating all the wounded. The engineers had restored full life support and gotten the shields back to 60% capacity. The Retribution had transferred emergency supplies to replace what had been damaged in the attack. In less than 6 hours, the humans had not only saved them, but restored their station to functionality. As the human teams prepared to leave, something unexpected happened. The station's inhabitants gathered to see them off. What had begun as fearful observation had become something else. Miners shook hands with engineers, careful of the humans' surprising grip strength. Children hugged the soldiers who had played with them. Even Synth performed a Korvax salute of respect to Captain Chen. Thylex found herself speaking for everyone when she addressed the human captain. We called for help, expecting the Galactic Patrol or maybe mercenaries. We never imagined.
She paused, choosing her words carefully.
We never imagined that the answer would come from those we feared most. You've shown us that the real monsters don't always look monstrous, and that sometimes what looks frightening is actually there to protect. Chen smiled, this time not hiding her teeth. Humanity had learned long ago that appearances were deceiving. We'll leave a patrol ship in this sector for the next few weeks, just to make sure nobody else tries anything. And if you ever need help again, just call. We'll be listening. As the human shuttles departed and their ships began to move away, Pren noticed something on his communication console. Other stations, other ships in nearby systems, they were all asking the same question. The Deathworlders had answered a distress call and saved everyone. The story was already spreading, traveling faster than light through the quantum communication networks. Within days, it would reach every corner of civilized space. The humans, the terrifying predators from the death world, had risked their lives to save strangers who feared them. They had asked for nothing in return except the promise to call if help was needed again. The galaxy's perception of humanity would never be the same. On the bridge of the Retribution, Captain Chen reviewed the after-action report with satisfaction. No casualties, minimal collateral damage, and a station full of people who would live to see another day. Her crew had performed admirably, maintaining discipline and showing the restraint that turned warriors into protectors. As they jumped back into hyperspace, heading for their next patrol route, she thought about the fear she had seen in those alien eyes when they first arrived. It was a familiar fear, one that humans had faced on their own world for millions of years. But humanity had learned something important in that struggle. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room is also the only thing standing between you and something worse. The story of Starweaver would spread throughout the galaxy, told in bars and schools, in military academies and diplomatic halls. How the Deathworlders had come not as conquerors but as guardians. How they had turned their terrifying efficiency toward protection rather than predation. How a cry for help had awakened not humanity's wrath, but humanity's compassion. And in the dark spaces between stars where predators hunted and the innocent fled, word spread among those who would do harm. The humans were listening. The Deathworlders were watching, and they would come for those who preyed on the helpless. The equation of fear had changed. It was no longer the humans that the galaxy feared most. It was what the humans would do to those who hurt the innocent. Back on Starweaver, life slowly returned to normal. Miners returned to their work. Families resumed their routines, but something fundamental had changed. In the station's small school, children played a new game, pretending to be humans coming to rescue those in need. Their parents didn't stop them. How could they when those same Deathworlders had saved them all? Thylex stood in her quarters that night watching her younglings sleep peacefully. They had drawn pictures of the humans depicting them as tall heroes with kind faces. It wasn't accurate. The humans were predators, dangerous and capable of terrible violence. But perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed, not despite their dangerous nature, but because of it. Because when the darkness came calling, when the real monsters emerged from the void, it was good to know that there were bigger, scarier monsters on your side. Monsters who had looked into the abyss of their own world and chosen to become something more. The Deathworlders, the humans, the protectors.